Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
We are back with our professional of the year, Dr. Grant Venerable, joining us. He's a doctor, author, artist, chemist. My goodness, he has had so many different executive roles and many years of experience working at different universities. And we're honored and ecstatic to have him here as a consultant, as a lecturer, as a publisher, and so much more. Grant, how are you today?
Well, I'm fine. There's been some good moments and anxious moments over the past week, but I'm in good shape today.
Beautiful.
I want to touch base with where we left off. Is this thing we call life? What happens after that?
Yeah, we did bring that up last time. Where do we go? What do you believe? And I'm curious, someone who is a professor, who's a doctor, I would love to hear your opinion and thoughts on this.
Segue to that.
Sure.
Sometimes when people ask me what branch of medicine I specialize in, and I say, well, I'm a doctor of molecules, a doctor of chemistry, and that means a PhD, of doctor of philosophy and chemistry from the University of Chicago. It's probably one of the few of the great universities in the nation where you find such a wide angle of discussions among professors and students who are in different fields. So the professors in all of the really top universities have faculty clubs that they have lunch in and go to dinner at and have special events at. And they see themselves, usually with other professors in their field. The University of Chicago, I think, has been special in that you find more interdisciplinary social interaction. And I got introduced to that in my first year of graduate school, which is back there a few decades. And I got taken to a dinner in the faculty club because they have endowed lectures. That means people of means will put up money to put their name on a lecture series. And this was the William Draper Harper lecture series. And they invited a very interesting, achieved physicist who had taught many years at U Chicago, and then the previous year had gone to U of Michigan to teach. And he walked in to visit the chair of chemistry during his visit for that lecture. And he happened to glance into the office across the hall of the graduate advisor, Dr. Shoemaker. And Dr. Shoemaker had about 7 of my paintings, artworks, on the walls. So how did they get there? They got there, I think, in the fall of 1965, when I was still living in the YMCA, the Hyde Park YMCA, which was only a mile from the university. The university had the habit of leasing floors and large apartment buildings and the YMCA to put up graduate students to rent rooms in. Well, it wasn't the highest class. It wasn't Hilton level housing, but it allowed, they had 2 floors above the main floors where these guys could live. They could do their homework. They could go to meals up the street or in the little cafeteria and talk to each other, and got to know each other through very special conversations.
Yeah.
Well, I got lonely for my paintings, which I left in Los Angeles. And I asked my father if he would ship me several of my paintings so that I could have them there. So he did. He shipped them out. But I took them to the graduate advisor and removed them from their boxes. And I said, do you think you could hold on to these while I'm here studying? Yeah. And he did. I says, let me put them up on the walls. And the smallest ones were 24 by 30 inches. And there was big one that was, about 30 by 40 inches. Well, it caused quite a stir, a happy stir in the
Ah,
chemistry building
world.
and the department. So this professor of physics saw them. He saw them on the walls. And the next event occurred was that he wanted to meet me. He says, these paintings were so special, so beautiful. They were so descriptive of the physics
Wow.
and the chemical structure of these particular molecules. So he put out the word to the graduate advisor to invite me to the office so he could meet me. And that's exactly what happened, where I met Professor John R. Platt, and he wanted to purchase one of the paintings. He liked it so much. So
Wow.
he paid me $75 for a large 30 by 40 inch painting. And he purchased a smaller painting for one of his colleagues at Michigan. It was a painting of a beautiful red carnation in a vase. But there was a molecule, kind of superposed upon this flower that was the molecular structure, cyanidine, the dye structure of the dye that made the rose, but it was a carnation to make it red. And that caused such an excitement in the departmental faculty. So faculty, professors are coming down and looking at the art, but the graduate advisor had a strategy in mind. He saw that as a welcome event for me, for the faculty to get to know me better as far as the scope of my thinking, what I like to think about, and it worked. And that's what happened. So I say that to say that advisor got me a ticket to the dinner that they had for this Professor Platt in the faculty club. Well, that was a very top of the line venue to eat. They had a professional kitchen and chefs that made the dinners, and they kept that place as a wonderful upper class club for professional men and women.
Yeah.
So I sat at a table with this advisor, Dr. Shoemaker, who was retired from his long career with Amoco, which was a Standard Oil corporation. And he pointed out different professors seated at different tables and said, oh, that man is independently wealthy, and he accepts $1 a year income from the university because he's wealthy enough to take care of himself. And he pointed out other professors who were like mathematicians. They were like Field Prize winners. There were a few Nobel Prize winners present on the faculty. And so it introduced me to the depth of that Chicago faculty and what they meant in science. So that's that story where my artwork really comes into play. But the story got out in the whole chemistry community in the United States and in Europe. So I began to get inquiries from professors in other states and in Europe if I would do a commission of their research that they were working on. I must have done 30 or 40 of those paintings, and they're spread out all over the country, all over the world. So that gave me a reputation. Sometimes it was mostly good, but sometimes it slaked more negative feelings of like, what is a chemistry student doing paintings, being an artist? So some of my younger professors said, what are you going to do? Are you going to be a scientist or an artist? I said, I'm going to be both because that's who I am. And I would gain more understanding of the chemistry I was studying if I made a painting of the subject that I was studying. Well, I had to win over that argument, which I finally did
Yeah.
in that argument. But that would be a good start to our chat today. But any questions about that? That was Chemistry Meets Art
That
by
is
Grant
beautiful. Exactly.
Venerable.
Hence, we also should tell everyone the name, right? Isn't it Art Molecular Concepts? The name of the company? Is that where
Well,
it came from or no?
that's the what do I call it? Art. Oh, Art Molecular
Concepts, yeah.
Concepts, LLC.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done business. I published books using that as my label. But my memoir, Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown, has several, maybe about 20 of my paintings reproduced in the chapters, full color. So that's an added
Mm-hmm.
excitement for anyone that owns the book and can enjoy those paintings and photographs of professors who actually commissioned the paintings. Now, so that was, two co-professions developing side by side. So the time I graduated in 1970 with a PhD, I was had a reputation, and I started my first teaching in '72 at Cal Poly State University.
Mm-hmm.
What came up yesterday is where I want to start with some storytelling. I was just talking to my brother about that. We both had our own special relationships with our grandfather, and our sister did also. And so all three of us are here in the desert, being able to have these conversations about what happened in past years and what we learned from them. My grandfather, his name was James Henry Scott. He was a farmer, as his wife, our grandmother. They were Kansas farmers. They he started the farm probably in the 1890s. And then they moved to Topeka, Kansas, and had this big farm outside of Topeka.
Mm-hmm.
He had the prize-winning herd of 200 Jersey cattle. Well, Grandpa was a self-made veterinarian. When his animals needed veterinary
Aww.
work, he did it himself.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't go to veterinary school, but good farmers studied what they needed to know, how to treat their animals, their livestock. So that's what Grandpa did.
Aww.
He was a very intellectual man. He kept up with the news, and he was very spiritually oriented. Now, he wasn't that much church going. He let his wife do the church going,
Yeah.
and he, the pastor one day asked him when he got very old, and sometime in when was that? The 1960s. People didn't live that long back in that day, but he did. He made it to 94 years of age. Now you see, people are getting to be centenarians more these days. But the Baptist pastor came to visit him to ask how his soul was doing, because he didn't go to church that much, and so he asked, well, Mr. Scott, how is it with your soul?
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa Scott said, fine, thank you. That was his response.
Aww.
And I have little doubt that he was fine with his soul, because that's how he operated. my brother and I remembered an event, a healing event that Grandpa played a central role in. We used to go out to the Victorville part of the Mojave Desert in Southern California. It was about 2,000 feet or more in elevation. And our relatives out there had a 100-acre farm, or say a ranch. But the active part of the ranch was more only occupied maybe a couple of acres around the farmhouse. But there was no running water in that day. That was in 1951 or so. And it had an outhouse.
Yeah.
And it had an excellent view of the Milky Way. Go out at night, and there was this Milky Way there. And once your eyes get adapted to the dark, that milky, what you see when you look up at it, it started developing pinpoints of light that would just jump right out at you. Those were the stars, the other galaxies, the nebulas that you could see, and planets that were out there. Well, that's where my art vision began. It was with that night sky.
Wow.
And I was only about maybe 11 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Said, that would be a great background.
Yeah.
To paint molecules that I'm starting to study in school. So by the time I got to college, I was starting with a great dark Prussian blue background, oils on canvas, and began putting in scenery that I wanted to show. Usually they were like desert-looking mountains. But then I would put the backdrop in the sky as stars. And then in the blank spaces in the middle, I would paint molecules. The first ones I did were methane molecules.
Wow.
Which were the structure, the geometry was a perfect tetrahedron.
I was going to say, I'm trying to remember what they look like. Yes. I'm going to have to Google.
Tetrahedron is a four-sided pyramid. Each side was equal in area. It had 4 points called apices and apex around the central nucleus of that molecule. And water has a structure like that, where you have an oxygen atom in the middle and 2 hydrogens occupying 2 of the apices. But the other 2 apices were occupied by a pair of electrons that were not bonded to any other atoms. But because of that structure, water has the unique special properties that it has. Its freezing point, its boiling point, and everything that it can achieve. It's one of the few chemical substances that actually expands when it freezes. So you have a nice tray of water. If you notice in your own ice trays, if you still use them.
Yep, I do.
Ice cubes, they get bigger than the space that the water, the liquid,
expand,
occupied. So, and that adapts it uniquely to being an important substance to the sustenance, the development of life, living organisms, life. So again, I'm going to go back to the question, do you trust your life? Do you trust life? And one reason I realize I can trust life is because physically, my physical body, my physical cell is made up of these water molecules that have certain special properties without which we could not live and be alive. We could not have DNA structures. We could not have a lot of other structures. Well, I have to get back to the desert when we visited. our aunt and uncle out there, and they had two large hogs their names were Bess and Mamie. Now, for anyone old enough, they know that those were the first names of the wives of two of our great presidents, namely Mamie Eisenhower and Bess Truman. So everyone knows the names of those presidents. And then they had a lot of chickens. They had egg-laying hens. They had a little herd of goats. The goats provided milk for the family to drink. And they also had 3 beautiful hound dogs. And one of the dogs, named Ike, see, notice the connection between Mamie Eisenhower and her husband, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was called Ike.
Yeah.
So Ike got sick during one of our vacations up there. And he was so sick, he was just dragging. He just couldn't hardly walk.
Yeah.
And the humane response is to put the dog down.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't suffer. And my dad said, well, just wait a minute. I have to go down to Los Angeles, which is 100 miles away from that part of the Mojave Desert, and said, let me consult with Grandpa Scott, my kid's maternal grandfather, and get his advice. Well, Grandpa had a reputation of being a healer. So people in the neighborhood would come to him to help heal them from whatever illness they were experiencing. But he was well known for a signature chemical substance that he made from different leaves, from different trees and herbs that he would put in there. He called it Pa's dope, and that he was known as Pa or Papa to different people. So he told my father, gave them instructions. I want you to take this little Vaseline bottle with Pa's dope in it and rub it around the gums of Ike and talk to him while you're doing that and why you're doing it. So he's, okay, thank you, Papa. And he drove back to the desert and did as instructed. And as instructed, I didn't show any improvement for a whole day. And then within the next couple of days, he got well. And that dog was jumping around with the other dogs, per usual. And our aunt and uncle up there were just amazed. Now, there's a little backstory to that goes to how certain healers in rural villages healed people and animals and plants.
Yeah.
So Grandpa was from that part of the country where that kind of practice was acknowledged. It was regularly utilized. He had lived before that where he was born in Kentucky, just outside Louisville. And he was born in 1870. So he was born way back in time. And a lot of Southerners could have ways of healing that were that way. My chemical theory on that is that Pa's dope connected to my grandfather.
Wow.
Somehow, whatever was in that chemical, those substances, it connected with my grandfather's mind. It connected with his spirit. That may sound very strange, but that's how a lot of people, spiritual healers, caused healing to take place. So that's just one example. in my life, but there were other relatives who did that as well.
Impressive. Oh, I want to remind everyone we are here with Grant Venerable. Again, if you are tuning in, our professional of the year. We are at a halfway mark here for the show and recapping some of last week and talking more today. We're going to, a little bit about the unknown, the afterlife, and some recent events I know you wanted to get to. But again, as a doctor, chemist, artist, he joins us live here, and we are ecstatic that he's back again today and really grateful for your presence. So thank you again for that. So let's continue. I know you did want to delve more into the other world and other side and some other current event type of things for today.
And that has to do with where did Grandpa and people like Grandpa gain that ability?
Yeah.
Because they had what we referred to a spiritual connection. What is that? I think that utterly baffles the academic world that I grew up in. Yet there were people in that world who were connected with that tradition. One man who was well versed with that we know him as George Washington Carver. Carver was born in, I think, Neosho, Missouri, and that was the name of a river that flowed through Kansas. Well, my father's sister was named after that river. Her name was Neosho. She was a very spiritually inclined woman who was able to connect with people and people who had needs of healing.
Yeah.
Mind and body healing. So we were around that kind of environment where we had an affirmative reaction to our needs rather than, we didn't go into fear very much, but the elders were able to lift us up out of fear if that should ever come about. Well, when did fear show up? It showed up in events that we would learn about in the newspaper. We got a Los Angeles Times every morning. And every so often there were disasters that it reported on. One was a big explosion up in the Bay Area, down in the harbor area, among oil tanks there along in the harbor, and they ignited one day, and it just sent this fire up. I think it frightened us as little kids to see these pictures, but we were also brought back to a spiritual understanding of life. Life is not always a happy place. It's not always a being well place, but it is a place where you can develop patterns where you're able to say, I trust life. And I had to re-ask myself that question numerous times in my history, particularly at times that I had disappointing events. And I said, wait a minute, I thought that I trust life. How could it do this to me? So that would send me into a larger scope of understanding. Sometimes today we say, well, life happens. And some of what happens is not what we would like to have happen. But there were enough events that we enjoyed that gave us great satisfaction, fulfillment, that outweighed the negative events. And if you can, on balance, have more positive events than negative events, you've had a successful life where you can say, I trust life. I've always trusted life. Even when it didn't look like it, I could trust life. So it would go, there were those moments. Other moments in Los Angeles were earthquakes. So we learned how to ride through an earthquake. And they were right around us. I mean, earthquakes could reach across many, many miles because there'd be an epicenter somewhere. And I think the last earthquake I kind of felt in the LA area was at a family reunion. The unusual thing about that reunion is that we were on a cruise ship out of Long Beach Harbor.
Oh, my.
There were about 25 members of the extended family on that cruise. And when we were in one of the banquet rooms of that big Carnival ship, we were relating the family history, the ancestors, for the benefit of the young members who did not know of those ancestors. Well, during that cruise, we felt the ship rock. Well, the ship always rocks when it runs into some heavy waves or idle activity. But this was a different rock. We didn't realize what had happened for another half hour when we heard there was an earthquake somewhere 200 miles away over in the southern part of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So we rode that out. It wasn't it was a good sized quake, maybe around a Richter scale 6 to 7 earthquake. So if you were up close to it on the land, you'd have seen groceries fly out of the shelves, fall on the floor, and you'd feel that. But this was muffled by the ocean, and so we didn't feel it as much. But those were things we had to learn how to ride through, to ride out. There were other examples of when I was in high school. There was a big quake in 1933. Now, I wasn't around for that earthquake, but my high school was an old building at that time, and that building was destroyed in that earthquake. Fortunately, the earthquake came after school, and there were no students or teachers that were harmed in the earthquake. I was talking about just with my brother Lloyd earlier this morning about the one of my classmates and three of her sons who we knew. Well, the sons are like in their 50s by now, but Chatera was this very insightful girl back then, but she became a very insightful woman. She went on and got her PhD in audiology. If you don't know what audiology is, it's a little different from audiometry, but audiometry helps us with our hearing when we get hard of hearing and we get hearing aids. But this woman, Chatera, Dr. Ingram, studied audiology, which is really more basic because it goes to what role does hearing play in the learning process. And she became a teacher of special needs students. Sometimes they were hard of hearing, other times they were not. But that was her footprint that she left in life once she left this life. So that's why the book, I hit upon the name Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. And if all of our listeners and viewers there think about their own feet and their own footprints that they make as they get up in the morning and they make footsteps through the day until they go to sleep. But they also are impacted by the footprints of others who came before them. That, therefore, became a guiding theme of the book, starting with footprints in education. education, it turns out, to be more closely aligned to the question we left off with last week, which was how does spirituality fit in with this do I trust life question? Where do we go when we leave this life? So that relates to what I've been gradually dealing with living here in the desert. I realized why that was a natural thing to have happen. It's because the ancient peoples, I should say pre-ancient, who came before, I mean, people that showed up 10,000 years ago, that's relatively recent because the first Homo sapiens people were showing up like 200,000 years ago. The earliest ones of that group, maybe 1,000,000 years ago. But we didn't get civilized or start to until 10,000 years ago with what we call hoe agriculture. How you hoe the land, you till the soil, and you plant seeds. Well, it was that activity of growing food that led us to everything else we did. So after agriculture came, maybe this is the way, it came to religion. People were they were suspecting something like religion. They didn't use that word, religion, but in English, we know it's derived from the Latin, which means that to which we bind ourselves back to, that governs our beings. So that's what the Desert Fathers dealt with. I mean, they were nomadic people. They had to scratch for their food and get their water wherever they could. They had caves they could sometimes live in. Yeah. And that's where they heard this thing called what modern people call the still small voice. And the still small voice sometimes says strange things. At least we think they're strange until we really study. What is this voice saying? That leads to not only agriculture, it leads to economics.
Yeah.
Religion gave us something, at least in the some of the Semitic religions, when pork had an interesting history. Pork was forbidden by people in the Jewish religion, but there were other meats that were also forbidden. So religious principles and beliefs grew up around what we ate or chose not to eat. And so they made up stories about why we can't eat pork. So that's where the story about microbes came from. That if we ate those microbes, we'd get sick or we would die. And that probably was not the case.
No.
The case was probably economic, in that there was actually plant life, a lot of it, in the ancient Middle East world. There were lakes, there were trees, and they raised pigs, they raised hogs, they raised cattle, and the pigs had to be covered. They had to have shade underneath the trees, or they could not, because they didn't sweat. No. So we had to have some other way to take care of our pork, and then eventually we lost the trees.
Oh,
so we lost the pigs.
Yeah,
we lost the pork. So those are just small examples you learn about in the field of anthropology. Like, where did economic beliefs come from? Where did trade come from? Where did money come from? Where did capital like that
money doesn't grow on trees, they say, but it kind of does.
So I want to get to one of the particular religions. There were three of the what we call the Abrahamic religions. There
Which
was, first
were
of all,
Judaism.
Judaism,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
then there was Islamic religion.
Yeah.
And some of the core principles of the rabbinical teachings created what we call today the Talmud. And the Talmud is really that deep, instructive methodology by
Wow.
which people teach and learn. So in the case of the ancients, they're transmitting to the young the principles of their culture. And a big part of that was their religion. Well, later on, education became the biggest part of it. So not only just religious education, but education in economics, education in agriculture, education in the sciences, history, all of those other fields of education. But the culture that developed around that was just remarkable. And that's why I'm a doctor of chemistry, because I learned the principles of chemistry and physics and mathematics. Now, the thing I'm realizing is more and more is I didn't go to the University of Chicago to learn in-depth advanced chemistry. I did learn it, but that's not the why I learned it. The why I learned it, I didn't know until in the last 2 years. But what I was really learning was the Talmudic method, which is the religious name for the scientific method.
Oh.
In other words, questions that are not any old questions. They're fundamental to the investigation of things unknown or suspected but not known. And that's what the rabbis developed in order to understand and improve their interpretation of Scripture. And so that it was picked up by others who got interested, way back there. Ancient Egyptian people were interested in how do you control the Nile River? The Nile has periods that are affected by the sun and the moon, the gravitational fields between Earth, the sun, and the moon. And so the Nile would have its risings and its falls in altitude. But what did that do? Well, stimulate knowledge that helped then predict the behavior of the Nile River. And that meant the study of mathematics, particularly those fields we know as arithmetic, algebra, which really came with the Arabs a little later, and then all the other fields. The calculus didn't really come until the 1400s or the 1300s, but it was there. So all those things had an origin in their religious activities. Now, some of the more conservative rabbis said, you shouldn't use it for science. We're really just for religion. But I think that's what conservatives are for, is to maintain the roots of what we already had. But we wouldn't get anywhere if we were all together conservative. So that's the thing. Laws came about out of religion that made education such a sacrosanct field. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but we're having some debates about that right now in what the government should do about this, and that. And one of the major that's is education, is Well, we want the schools to start teaching the truth, as if the schools never taught the truth.
Interesting.
Because I certainly was teaching the truth. But they're talking about who those particular audiences about. The truth we want youngsters to know so that they will be more loyal to our view of government. So, but because education is a religious-based principle, there's consequences for violating literally what we think of as the laws of God. And it's like, who is God? How do we know that there is a God or that God even exists? Well, that was the Desert Fathers. They didn't want to call it that because they didn't know what its name was. But they said there's a something out there that if we know how to align ourselves with its principles, our lives work better. So let us try to do that. However, we found if we went against those principles, like 10 commandments, loving thy neighbor, honoring thy father and thy mother, all that kind of thing. If we go against that, our lives don't go as well. And it's as if this God, whatever it is, punishes for violations of that law. And that's where it gets really interesting. And that's the kind of debate we used to hear in the University of Chicago. Not so much at other universities that ascribe more to a strictly what we call agnostic view of life and knowledge. But the Chicago professors were so liberated in what they felt they could examine and talk about. And so that's why one of my professors who taught quantum physics in my first year at Chicago, he would be going through this complex equation from the calculus, a differential equation for how you can predict the energy levels of simple molecules. And he would sometimes speculate in his own personal mind in front of the class. Well, if you were God, which equation would you use to compute the answer to the question of energy levels in a molecule? That stimulated us as students, like, hey, that's a question. We didn't think about that. So we'd say, well, what would God use? If there's a God, what would that God use?
Yeah.
So that stimulated thinking in a wider scope than if you just had no conception of anything spiritual or religious going on in your life. Now, how are we now so far, Jill? Now,
we are good. We got 7 minutes left. We're good. We are good. We got a lot in today, but we still have more time.
So do you have any, I really want to get to a point where we could get a lot of people who are just calling in.
Talking and calling. Well, we've never opened up the phone lines. Well, why don't we do that?
Asking their questions. Well, sure. Dr. Venerable, if X, Y, and Z, then what about A, B, and C?
Yeah. Well, let me open the phone lines if someone out there is listening. Okay. So hold on. 631-307-4010 if you have any questions for Dr. Grant Venerable. Again, that's 631-307-4010. Please give us a call. I wish you would have known, because normally I would open them up earlier in the show. I'm not sure who, so let's try it. Or maybe even next time we'll get some calls.
Well, whatever questions, nothing is off limits here.
Wow.
So.
And there's a lot to talk about. Anything that we've talked about today, anything. I guess no questions off limits, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, hopefully someone calls and reaches out, 631-307-4010. If they don't, what other current things did you want to kind of leave for today?
It makes me think of the Art Linkletter show in the 40s and the 50s. I don't know how many listeners today would remember Art Linkletter is one of the most popular personalities on radio and television when he got on TV. But he was a show that came out of Los Angeles where the TV and the radio industry were still in their relative youth.
Mm-hmm.
And Linkletter had this interesting, fascinating part of his show where he invited 5 children from one school in the LA school district. And of course, there were like 100 or 200 schools in Los Angeles. And he could get kids from a different school every Friday or every day for that matter. And he eventually appointed one of the teachers at my elementary school, Vermont Avenue School, Miss Fitzgerald, to be the teacher who would go out from the studio in the studio limousine and pick up the kids from the school. And so one day that was my honor to be picked up as one of the 5 kids from Vermont Avenue School. And there was a part of his routine with the kids where he would interview us. That's what would happen.
Really?
And of course he had to be careful in terms of what he asked, but usually it worked out. And wonderful questions like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we would tell him answers to questions like that. And I don't think he asked where we lived or anything, but he might have. But we had, good people, well-known people in the audience who could be there and enjoy the show.
Aww.
Linkletter, I forgot, he must have been about maybe 50 years old then. But he lived to be, I think, over 100 years old, which was extraordinary. He had some of the more interesting characters in the Hollywood profession and who lived in Southern California that he would bring to his show. Some things, as you might imagine, that they wouldn't go into today, but many topics were quite in order in that day. So there's topics we talk about today on television that were not talked about like 20 years ago. So we watched hip hop music and we watched other kinds of music. But that's another subject because one of my relatives was a godfather of hip hop and rap, and worked with Berry Gordy at Motown, and I'm discovering people like Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, and some of the other greats.
Wow. Well, let me ask, again, the lines are open 631-307-4010. If anyone does want to call in, we do have another 3 minutes left in the show. The work that you do, continue to do, I'm just curious, there's so much in your brain that's so creative, that's so profound. So all the knowledge from that you've learned since, of course, a child, but then going to, medical school, like going to college, and here you are still as a professor, still teaching others. Something you would give back to our young children now who are debating life. School ends. What would you tell them? What type of advice, and, being someone who's so wise and so detail oriented, and so what type of advice would you like to leave with someone out there who's just starting out in the world, in a sense, a young teenager, 16, 17, 18?
Sure. Well, whenever possible, I do that. It's more of storytelling, time to tell stories.
Excuse me.
That's
Yeah.
what I know how to do. Just stories from my past that may contribute to understanding some challenge someone is having today and how to get through that challenge. Of course, we didn't have the media when I was a child that we have now. We have such different challenges.
Yeah.
And I was looking at my news feeds before I tuned into this podcast just to keep on top of, so I'm not surprised by anything that may come up from a question like, but there were some surprises since the last 2 days and what's going on, and politics has become such an interesting place. So I look at things people say and do rather than mentioning names, which get overly personal. People get exercised as soon as you mention a name. So I stay away from that, but I get down to brass tacks about what people are discussing. So I could tune into the background here on my little computer of what was the latest thing that was said, like, yeah. The Talmud is really a modern name for critical thinking. And there's very little critical thinking going on because fear has become so prevalent. And a little bit of critical thinking can just allay a whole lot of fear, because the things you might read about or hear about or see about make no sense at all. And when you get down to that, you just dismiss it and say, well, that's not true, because it does not pass the test of scientific reasoning or critical thinking. And I know that's something that some people want to keep under control, so people can't do that. So that they can tell people anything they want to tell them, and they'll just be loyal to whatever they say. So that's where I was at this morning.
Beautiful.
Going over the news feeds.
Well, thank you again for being here and for joining us. How can we reach out to you, darling?
Grant D. Venerable, PhD, all lowercase, .com. And that brings up a whole lot of things that would be interesting to know, including about my father and other members of the family. So
beautiful.
The book title is Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown.
Got it.
And you'll see exactly why it has that title once you see it on a website like Amazon.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you here. Next time, we'll open up the phone lines a little earlier when we start, so hopefully we can get some callers out there. And I want to thank you for all your input and following up today and recapping and just being here. You're just a beautiful soul that has so much knowledge to share. And thank you for your opinions and for all the information. You have a fantastic day, Grant.
You're welcome, Jill.
Goodbye
Thank
to our
you.
professional of the year. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.